Now let's talk about financial reporting for public companies. Public companies, they're also called issuers because they issue securities out to the public. Now in the US, public companies, they're governed by SEC requirements. SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission. For financial reporting purposes, we're talking about regulation SK of the SEC and regulation SX. Now, SEC requires those public companies, issuers, to periodically file certain forms. Now, regulation SK talks about which forms do these public companies have to file and by when. So, SK is which forms to file and when. SX talks about what to include in these forms, the content of these forms which are periodically filed with the SEC. Now, first let's talk about form S1. This is the registration statement. So when a company initially wants to issue securities out to the public, they want to go for an IPO, they file form S1 with the SEC. So after they've become public, every year their annual financial statements, all these financials, every year they are filed with the SEC on form 10K. Very important, form 10K. This contains the annual financial statements of the company. These financial statements, they are audited by an independent registered public accounting firm, and the companies have certain timelines by which they have to get the annual financial statements. They will get form 10K with the SEC. So for a large accelerated filer, that's companies with equity float of more than $700 million, very big public companies, they've got just 60 days after the year end to file form 10K with the SEC. If it's just an accelerated filer, that means companies having equity float more than 75 million, less than 700 million, they've got 75 days after year end. For non-accelerated filers, companies which have less than $75 million of equity float, they have as much as 90 days after year end to file form 10K with the SEC. So as you can basically understand, the larger the public companies, the faster they have to run to get their form 10Ks to SEC. This form 10K includes their annual financial statements. Now, SEC requires that these financials be in comparative form. So SEC requires last 2 years of balance sheet. Let's say it's a calendar year corporation and we're looking at calendar year 2012. So the balance sheet needs to be at the end of 2012, that's 31st December 2012, as well as at the end of the previous year, that's 31st December 2011. So 2 years of balance sheet and 3 years of everything else. So when we're looking at the income statement, it needs to be for 2012, for 2011 and 2010. So last 3 years of comprehensive income. So you have 12, 11 and 10. Again, when we're looking at the statements of stockholders' equity and the statement of cash flows, needs to be presented for the year 2012, 2011, 2010. So 3 years of all statements and 2 years of balance sheet. That's SEC requirements for annual financial statements which are submitted on form 10K to the SEC. Now, the 10K not only contains the annual financial statements, it contains a lot of information about the company. So it's got description of the business that the company does, the risk factors faced by the company, the properties the company has, any legal proceedings against the company. Along with the financials, on the second part, they've got selected financial data, management discussion and analysis, market risk disclosures, any controls and procedures for the company, changes and disagreements in auditors. So all that's there on 10Ks filed with the SEC. 10K also includes information like the directors and executive officers of the company, the executive compensation being paid out to these officers, securities owned by the owners and management, any relationships, related transactions. So guys, a lot of information is there on 10K even beyond the annual financial statement. So all this is there plus a lot more. So guys, this basically, if you want to know all about a company, you are looking at the SEC filings. Here you get a lot of information that would help you understand the company and its operation, its risks, its financials for sure. Now, as I told you, 10K, this is annual financial statement. So this is at the end of the year. Now, even within the year, the SEC requires interim financial reporting or quarterly reports being filed on Form 10Q. So 10K, this was annual financial statements. 10Q, Q stands for quarter. So this is quarterly financial statements. Now, annual financial statements, I told you, they need to be audited by an independent auditor. Now, in case of quarterly financial statements, they just need to be reviewed. Now, audit means a lot of work where the independent auditor, they express an opinion on the financials, whether these numbers, they're true and fair. In case of a review, the auditor does not do so much work. He does limited procedures and he expresses a limited or negative assurance on the financials, because there's a lot of rush. In case of annual financials, they have 60 to 90 days after year end, depending upon how big the public company is. In case of quarterly financials, it's 40 days for both large accelerated filer and for accelerated filer. And it's 45 days for non-accelerated filers. So it's pretty quick, and that's why it's reviewed, not audited. So every year, a public company issuer needs to file 3 Form 10Qs. So first quarter 10Q, second quarter 10Q, third quarter again a 10Q. For the fourth quarter, a 10K is filed because that's the entire year. So first, second, third, 3 quarterly reports. For the fourth quarter, instead of getting out a 10Q, they get out a 10K, which contains the entire year's financial statements. Now, even in between quarters, if there are any material events or corporate changes by the company, they need to file the Form 8K with the SEC. So this is for any material events, and the timeline for this is just 4 business days after that event. So any information which the stockholders should be aware of needs to be filed with the SEC by public companies on Form 8Ks. So as you can understand, this would be information about mergers and acquisitions by the company. Any changes in the directors or the management of the company. Let's say the CFO of the company leaves. The company needs to file Form 8K with the SEC, inform the SEC that the CFO has left. There's a new business deal. They've shut down a plant. There's a layoff. 8K filed with the SEC. So basically any major changes in operations status, any change in auditors, even that needs to go out on 8K to the SEC. So guys, these are the major forms that you need to be aware of for your CPA exams. Now this is for US registrants. How about a foreign registrant with the SEC? So non-US company registered with the SEC. Now instead of filing an initial form S1, they would do Form F1. Instead of filing Form 10K for the annual financial statements, they file Form 20F for their annual financial statements. If it's a Canadian issuer, they need to file Form 40F. So again, it's the annual financial statements, but because it's non-US company, the form is different, the requirements are a little different. Now, for quarterly reports and any material events, the requirement is that the foreign issuer needs to file Form 6K with the SEC. So basically 6K says any information that the foreign company issues to its local regulators, to its investors, to its stock exchanges must be filed with the SEC on Form 6K. So they don't have a requirement for 10K or 10Q or 8K. Instead, they do 6Ks for any information that they give out locally to their investors. So that again needs to be filed with the SEC on 6K. So every year, 20F, quarterly results or any material events, that's a 6K. So guys, this is very important. As you can understand, SEC filings that contains pure information about a company, where you can find all that you ever wanted to know about a company. So read them, and trust me, you'll love SEC filings. We're looking at SEC reporting requirements. Right there, Regulation SK equals which form to file and when. So Regulation SK of the SEC talks about which forms need to be filed with the SEC and when should these forms be filed. Then Regulation SX That talks about what to include in the forms, basically the content of the forms being filed with the SEC. Now, SEC reporting requirements generally apply to public companies. So highlight companies with publicly traded securities. Now, it could also apply to a few private companies if highlight assets greater than 10 million, also highlight 2000 or more shareholders. So if a private company has assets in excess of $10 million or 2000 or more shareholders, even they need to comply with the SEC reporting requirements. Now, let's look at some of the key reporting requirements. Highlight registration statement S1. Now, this is a statement which is submitted to the SEC when a company issues new securities. Highlight Form 10K, highlight annually, and highlight audited financial statements. Then moving down, highlight Form 10Q, highlight quarterly, highlight unaudited financial statements, and underline the word reviewed. So the quarterly financials, they are not audited, but they are reviewed by the independent auditor. Now it says a company files 3 Form 10Qs every year. So highlight 3 Form 10Qs every year. So for the fourth quarter, that is included within Form 10K, the annual filing. Now you have a table on the bottom of this page which contains the filing deadlines for Form 10K and 10Q. Now this is very important. Put a star here. Now the deadlines vary whether it's a large accelerated filer, it's an accelerated filer, or a non-accelerated filer. So if the company has a public float of $700 million or more, that's a large accelerated filer, and the deadline for Form 10K highlight 60 days, 10Q highlight 40 days. If it's an accelerated filer, that's $75 to $700 million, the deadline is highlight 75 days for 10K, 40 days for 10Q. For non-accelerated filers, less than $75 million of public float, the 10K deadline is highlight 90 days and 10Q deadline is 45 days. This is very important. And here you have Form 11K, 20F, 40F, Form 6K. Very important, next one, highlight Form 8K. Now this is filed to report material events that affect the company such as M&As, change in directors or CEO, other major changes in operations or status, changes in auditors, etc. And the filing deadline is within highlight 4 business days. Then we have Regulation SX, and we're talking about the form and content of the filings. So you have requirements for annual financial statements. So you're required to be audited, and then we're talking about periods presented. So on the left, first write 10K is equal to annual. So annually, companies need to file Form 10K with the SEC. And on the annual financial statements, they need to have highlight balance sheet for 2 fiscal years, income statement, cash flows, and stockholders' equity for 3 fiscal years. Then you have the requirements for interim financial statements, and right there 10Q is equal to quarterly. Now the next page, which is a blank page, let's try to list down the comparative financial reporting requirements for SEC registrants. Now let's assume we're talking about a calendar year corporation, and we're looking at the 3 10Qs and the 1 10K for 2012. So make 3 columns there for balance sheet B/S, income statement I/S, cash flows C/F. For the first quarter, write Q1 2012. So that 10Q for quarter 1 2012 would have at least two balance sheets. Balance sheet as of the end of the quarter, right there, 3/31/2012, and the balance sheet as of the end of the previous fiscal year. Since it's a calendar year corporation, the end of previous fiscal year, that's right, 12/31/2011. Now for the income statement on the first 10Q, you will have Q1 2012 presented along with comparative numbers of Q1 2011. Cash flows, again you'll have Q1 2012 and Q1 2011. Let's get to the second 10Q for the year, right there, Q2 2012. The balance sheet as of the end of the quarter, right, 6/30/2012, and the balance sheet as of the end of the previous fiscal year, right, 12/31/2011. Income statement, now we're looking at four income statements, right, Q2 2012, Q2 2011, Q1 plus Q2 2012, that's for the half year ended 2012, and Q1 plus Q2 2011. For cash flows, we're looking at Q1 plus Q2 2012 and Q1 plus Q2 2011. So we're looking at cash flows for the year till the end of the second quarter. Now let's talk about the third 10Q, right, the Q3 2012. Again, balance sheet as of the end of the quarter, right, 9/30/2012, and the balance sheet as of the previous fiscal year, right, 12/31/2011. Again, we're looking at four income statements, Q3 2012, Q3 2011, Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3 2012, and also Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3 2011. For cash flows, right, Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3 2012, and also Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3 2011. So these were the three 10Qs for calendar year 2012. Now for annual 2012, right, annual 2012, the 10K, we're looking at two balance sheets, right, 12/31/2012 and 12/31/2011. We're looking at three income statements, right, 2012, 2011, 2010. And we are also looking at three cash flows, three stockholders equity, right, 2012, 2011 and 2010. So guys, with this annotation, I've tried to explain you the concept of comparative financial reporting. So this could be important on your CPA exams, so it's good to be aware of what are the reporting requirements for SEC registrants.